The moment of revelation came during a quiet evening at Ronaldo's home in Madrid, when he was scrolling through his tablet after dinner, initially looking for updates on upcoming matches and training schedules, but somehow finding himself drawn into a news article about recent developments in the West Bank that he had never fully understood before. Despite years of seeing headlines that he had always assumed were too complicated for someone without a political science degree to comprehend. The article included a detailed interactive map showing the expansion of Israeli settlements over the past decade, with before and after satellite images that made it impossible to ignore the reality of what was happening to Palestinian communities whose homes, schools, and farmland were being systematically taken and replaced with developments that excluded the original inhabitants. And as Ronaldo zoomed in on specific areas, he began to see individual houses, playgrounds, and olive groves that had been bulldozed to make way for new construction that seemed to follow a pattern of deliberate displacement rather than natural urban development. What struck him most powerfully was not the political arguments or legal complexities that usually dominated discussions of this issue, but the simple human reality of families who had lived in the same place for generations, suddenly finding themselves cut off from their neighbors, their workplaces, their children's schools, and sometimes even their own farmland, by walls, checkpoints, and roads that they were not allowed to use, creating a daily existence that seemed designed to make normal life impossible and encourage people to leave voluntarily, rather than continue fighting for their right to remain in their ancestral homes. Ronaldo found himself thinking about his own connection to his hometown in Madeira. How important it was to him to know that the places where he had played as a child still existed, where his family's history was rooted, where he could always return to find familiar faces and landscapes that connected him to his identity. And he tried to imagine how he would feel if someone with more power and better lawyers simply decided that his neighborhood should belong to someone else, and that his family's presence there was no longer convenient or acceptable. The more he read, the more he realized that this was not a conflict between two equal sides fighting over disputed territory, but a systematic process of expansion by a much stronger party that had the military and legal power to take what it wanted, while the international community offered statements of concern but no meaningful consequences, creating a situation where the victims of this process had no realistic way to protect themselves or their children's futures through normal legal or diplomatic channels. Over the next several days, Ronaldo found himself spending hours researching the history and current reality of settlement expansion, reading reports from human rights organizations, watching video testimonials from Palestinian families who had lost their homes, and studying maps that showed how the geography of the West Bank had been fundamentally altered over the past several decades in ways that made a viable Palestinian state increasingly impossible, while creating facts on the ground that seemed designed to be irreversible, regardless of any future political agreements. The breaking point came when he watched a video of a Palestinian farmer named Ahmed who had been tending the same olive trees for 40 years, trees that his grandfather had planted and that had supported his extended family for generations, but who was now forbidden to access his own land because a new settlement had been built nearby, and the Israeli military had declared the area a closed zone for security reasons. Leaving Ahmed to stand at a checkpoint and watch his trees die from lack of care while settlers from the new development walked freely through groves that had never belonged to them. Something about Ahmed's dignity in the face of this injustice, the way he spoke calmly about his losses while still expressing hope that someday his grandchildren might return to the land, reminded Ronaldo of his own grandfather, who had worked hard all his life to build something lasting for his family. And he realized that he could no longer pretend that this was too complicated for him to understand or too controversial for him to address. Because at its core, this was about basic human rights and the simple principle that taking someone's home and livelihood by force is wrong, regardless of the political justifications offered for such actions. The statement that Ronaldo finally posted on his social media accounts was shorter than many had expected, but more powerful in its simplicity. I have been learning about the expansion of Israeli settlements in the West Bank and the impact this has on Palestinian families who are losing their homes, their farmland, and their freedom of movement. As someone who believes that all people deserve to live with dignity in their ancestral homes, I cannot stay silent about policies that systematically displace civilian populations and make peace more difficult to achieve. Taking someone's land and home by force is wrong, whether it happens quickly through violence or slowly through bureaucracy and military occupation. The Palestinian people deserve the same rights to security, freedom, and self-determination that we would want for our own families. The response was immediate and overwhelming, with millions of shares within the first hour, and reactions ranging from passionate support from people who felt that finally someone with a massive platform was willing to speak clearly about an issue that many celebrities avoided, to fierce criticism from supporters of Israeli policies who accused him of oversimplifying a complex situation and promoting a one-sided narrative that ignored Israeli security concerns and historical claims to the land. But what surprised many observers was that Ronaldo did not back down or try to soften his message when the criticism intensified, instead posting a follow-up statement that said, "I understand that some people disagree with my perspective on this issue, and I respect their right to hold different views. However, I have studied this situation carefully, spoken with people who are directly affected, and reached my own conclusion based on the evidence I have seen. I believe that when you have a platform that reaches millions of people, you have a responsibility to speak up for those who are suffering, even when it is uncomfortable or controversial. My position is not based on politics or religion, but on the simple belief that all human beings deserve to live free from the threat of having their homes taken away." The controversy escalated when several Israeli officials and pro-Israel organizations called for boycotts of Ronaldo's endorsements and demanded that his sponsors distance themselves from his statements, while Palestinian advocacy groups and human rights organizations praised his courage in addressing an issue that many public figures avoided due to fear of professional or financial consequences, creating a polarized response that dominated social media and news coverage for weeks. Some of Ronaldo's sponsors initially expressed concern about the potential impact on their brands, but others surprised industry observers by explicitly supporting his right to speak on human rights issues, with one major company issuing a statement that said they were proud to be associated with an athlete who used his platform to advocate for justice and human dignity rather than staying silent about important moral issues. The most meaningful response came from Palestinian communities around the world, who organized tribute events and created murals thanking Ronaldo for seeing them as human beings worthy of the same rights and protections that people in other parts of the world took for granted. And from Ahmed, the farmer whose story had moved Ronaldo to speak out, who sent a video message saying that knowing someone with such a powerful voice cared about his family's suffering gave him hope that the world had not forgotten about the Palestinian people and their right to live in peace on their own land. But perhaps the most significant impact was the conversation that Ronaldo's statement sparked among his hundreds of millions of followers, many of whom had never seriously considered the human cost of settlement expansion or understood how the daily reality of occupation affected ordinary Palestinian families who just wanted to live normal lives, work their land, send their children to school, and build futures in the communities where their families had lived for generations. Educational organizations reported a massive spike in people seeking information about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, with many saying they had been inspired by Ronaldo's example to learn more about an issue they had previously considered too complicated or controversial to understand. And human rights groups noted increased engagement from young people who had never before shown interest in Middle Eastern politics, but who were now asking serious questions about international law, human rights, and the responsibility of the international community to protect civilian populations. Years later, when asked about the decision to speak out on such a controversial issue, Ronaldo said, that he considered it one of the most important moments of his career, not because of any football achievement, but because it represented his commitment to using his platform for something more meaningful than entertainment or self-promotion. And because it demonstrated that athletes and celebrities have not just the right, but the obligation to speak up when they witness injustice, regardless of the personal or professional costs that might result from taking principled stands on difficult issues. The statement fundamentally changed how many people viewed both Ronaldo and the role that sports figures could play in addressing serious global issues, proving that authentic moral leadership could be more powerful than any goal or trophy, and inspiring other athletes to consider how they might use their own platforms to advocate for justice and human rights in a world where silence too often serves the interests of those who benefit from maintaining unjust systems.